So hello, everyone. I hope you all can hear me. Good afternoon and welcome to the virtual office hours that is sponsored by the American Bar Association. This virtual office hours is pertaining to legal writing. This is a brand new series brought to you by, again, the American Bar Association. Our hope is to discuss various topics and answer your questions in a very relaxed and calm atmosphere. We want you to feel very open and free to ask your genuine questions. I know that I have an assignment due, so I will be asking questions. And this is just the perfect opportunity for us to just have a nice conversation. So again, welcome. My name is Jaira Davis. I am a 2L at the Thurgood Marshall School of Law at Texas Southern University here in the beautiful Houston, Texas. I am also the delegate of diversity and inclusion for the American Bar Association Law Student Division. So we'll talk a little bit about how to get involved a little bit later. But now joining us today is Professor Amanda Elyse. Professor Elyse received her Juris Doctor from Seattle University School of Law, her Master's of Science in Writing from Portland State University, and her Bachelor of Arts with honors in English with a creative writing emphasis from the University of Washington. She previously taught in the legal writing program at Seattle University School of Law, and when she was in practice, she worked at a nonprofit organization where she provided legal support to social justice activists, frontline communities, and political prisoners. So she has been very, very busy and has had a wonderful career. So now Professor Elyse teaches legal writing in the Legal Method and Communication program at Elon University School of Law. So again, just feel free to welcome her and ask any questions, and so we can really just have a nice, open and safe conversation.
Great, thank you so much for that welcome. I'm glad to be here with you all today. I was going to start out by just running through tips that I have for you all, and I really am just going to do this in the format of just going through my list of things that I felt like would be good to share with you all about legal writing. And then after that, I will move on to your questions. So to start with legal writing, I think that it's important to remember that there's a process and to really go through those steps, starting with brainstorming your ideas and both alone as well as working with classmates to what extent that's permitted in your program to really talk through those ideas and then do the outlining and diagramming of what your paper is going to look like, followed by drafting, and a really key thing, taking time with revising the draft. Of course, legal writing can be complex. It can involve a lot of different components, and so it makes sense that when we do that kind of work that we need to have time to revise it and not just turn in a first draft. After doing the major revisions, then taking time to edit and proofread our work before turning in the final product. So those are the big steps that I like to highlight for students of working through over the course of an assignment. While they're doing this, I like to really encourage, especially in the drafting and revision process, to read your work out loud. It's amazing the things that you can catch through reading a piece of writing out loud. And I know sometimes it feels weird to do that, whether you want to do it with a friend or just on your own, it can feel awkward. But I've pushed my students to do this, and every year they tell me that it helps them a lot with catching things in their writing and improving their sentence structure. Also with revising, I really encourage students to leave time between stages of revising so that you can work on a draft and then put it aside and then come back to it later with fresh perspective and then be able to put it aside again and come back again. So to what extent you can space out working on your legal writing homework. And also I really recommend using hard copies. I know that we are very much in the age of having all of our stuff in electronic form, but whenever possible, I encourage you to print out and actually have hard copies of your writing, because you will see things differently. When we are looking at screens, our brains are kind of trained now to skim a lot, and we don't read as closely. But when you sit down with a hard copy and you have a pen in your hand, You will catch things that you wouldn't on the screen. And it's a great way to actually be able to, you could literally cut up the parts of your paper and move them around. You can write on it, you can draw arrows, things that can be much easier sometimes to do with a hard copy when it's tangible. Also, don't procrastinate. I know that it's when you get loaded up with all the work in law school that it's easy to keep pushing aside a paper that you have to work on, especially because it can feel sometimes like that requires more mental energy than maybe a reading assignment. But it's important to start just diving into what you need to work on so that you can space out working on it, so that you have time to ask your professor questions if needed. And so just start working, even if you don't know exactly what you want to say. If you can start getting those words on the page, then you actually have something to work with. Something else I encourage students to do is to seek out pieces of writing that aren't written by who we usually hear from in law school. A lot of what we read is written by lawyers and judges for lawyers and judges, but obviously the legal system impacts many more people than that. Many other people are involved. And so I encourage you to seek out writing that's maybe written by people from impacted communities or who for some reason are going to have a different perspective on the law, so that you can also be working to develop how you talk about the law with more of a mixture of audiences. Each year I have my students actually read the book Jailhouse Lawyers by Mumia Abu-Jamal, who is a political prisoner, as well as an award-winning journalist. And so he is sharing stories of people working on their own cases from within prison. And it gives my students a very different perspective on the legal system, as well as sees legal writing essentially, but in a different way. It's not a memo or a brief, but instead it's stories of the legal system. Something else that's always important throughout law school is taking care of yourself. It's something that I think that we can't stress enough, especially with all the added stressors that are currently existing, that take time for yourself. To speak to writing in particular, if you are too tired or fatigued in other ways, it's going to be hard to sit down and learn and do the work that you want to be doing if you aren't having self-care practices, whatever that means to you. I tell my students to think about things that they enjoy doing at the start of law school and then to continue that throughout law school. I also encourage them to think about things that they feel grateful for, because I learned this summer in workshops that I've attended that when we are in a state of gratefulness about, especially about learning, that we actually absorb more information. So as things get stressful, it can be great to take a moment to take a deep breath and think about what you're grateful for. Something that I can't emphasize enough is how legal writing is foundational. And we really need to approach it as such. I know that sometimes people place a lot of emphasis on their doctrinal classes because those have the big, like impressive sounding legal names. We have like constitutional law and criminal law. And those are of course important to learn about, but regardless of what type of work you're doing, the writing is going to be foundational. And so I encourage you to really put in the time into legal writing. It'll help you on exams in the other classes. It'll help you in practice. It'll help you at internships. So actually dedicate the time to it that you need to succeed in there. Another thing that I feel like I can't emphasize enough is to actually meet with your professors, whether it's in-person office hours or now meeting on something like Zoom. Take advantage of time to meet with your bring questions. I love it when my students have been thinking about the areas that they want my assistance with, and they can ask me those questions. To me, that's part of seeing the learning process that they're going through, is that they're recognizing what things they want assistance with. And don't think that you're bothering professors or something like that. This is, I mean, it's part of our job to meet with you. And I find it to be one of the most rewarding parts of my job, is actually getting to work one-on-one with students and seeing how their writing is tangibly improving. So don't feel like you're being a burden. Ask to meet with your professors. Ask them questions over email if they're receptive to that. And just really get to know your professors. It will help you in the class. It also might help you with things like letters of recommendation or recommendations for where to do an internship. So get to know your professors. Something else that I think is important to remember is that people pick up legal writing at different stages, and that's okay. I think that sometimes people assume because maybe you were an English major or a poli-sci major that this class is going to be easier for you. Or if you were an engineering major, it's going to be harder. But that's not the case from what I've seen. Sometimes, to speak to the engineering example, a couple years ago, one of my strongest students had formerly been an engineer. And the way that he analyzed things through engineering transferred over to legal writing. And so I think it's sometimes kind of unexpected what former skills are going to help us in this class. And sometimes to recognize when some of our prior experiences haven't prepared us for legal writing. And that's all okay, because legal writing is something we should think of as a new skill set. And it's okay to be where you're at and then think of, this is where you're starting, and from here, I'm going to build on that. What I tell my students is, I'm going to meet you where you're at, and we're going to keep advancing your work to the next level. You don't have to have the same goals as your classmates. You don't necessarily have to be thinking about like what letter grade you want, but I really encourage thinking about repeatedly taking your work to the next level, something you can see that progress, be proud of it, and you'll keep advancing in that way. Along with that, I really want to emphasize that feedback from your legal writing professors is not a bad thing. Feedback is a huge place of learning. And I think a lot of undergrad classes, we think of the classroom and our reading assignments as where we do the bulk of the learning. And then when we do something like write an essay or do an exam, we're just being graded on, okay, were you right or wrong? But in legal writing, so much of the learning happens not just in the classroom. I feel like that's a fraction of it, but so much of learning happens through engaging with your work and engaging with your professor's feedback. Take the feedback as a compliment that your professor is putting the time into the work that you did to help you improve your skills, and then to take the comments to heart in some way, to think of that as this guidance to how you can improve your work, and to let the feedback that is things you're doing well, like let that sink in. I know a lot of times we tend to focus on feedback that we consider negative, but the feedback that's telling you what you're doing well is just as valuable to take in. And then from there, for the feedback about what to improve, as I said, think of that as guidance and part of the learning process. And when you engage with that feedback, that's where you'll see a lot of the progress that's happening. And with that, like, you really can improve your legal writing skills over the course of not only a particular term, but over a year, throughout law school and into practice. Writing is something that it's a long road of continuing to improve, and there's always more that you can learn about it, and you'll be able to do that. You can think about having the idea of like a growth mindset, where we can take in new skills, we can learn more. Where we start in legal writing is not a fixed point that we're at. We can move forward from there, taking our writing repeatedly to the next level, learning more and more skills, and adding to the skills as we move through our classes. Something else to highlight is a lot of times students end up obsessing over citations, and citations are important. You need to learn how to do them correctly, but don't sacrifice focusing on learning how to actually engage in legal analysis to obsess over citations, I guess I'll say. The analysis should be where the bulk of your time is going. And so, yeah, I just see my students a lot, like really wanting to know more about citations. It's like, learn them, but then overall, let's focus on the analysis. Also, it's okay to have to like keep rereading cases that you're using in your writing, to have to keep revising your writing. That's what you should be doing. You're not expected to read a case once and then be able to just instantly, easily use it to write a memo. You're expected to have to go back, to return to the text, to make sure you're analyzing it correctly, to maybe realize you need to look at it from a different perspective. That's all okay. You're not doing something wrong by having to go revisit the cases. You're doing something right by making sure that you are being very precise in how you're using those cases. And also, this process all gets faster. You will, for those of you who are just starting law school now, you'll be amazed at how, when you look back in a few months, how far you've come, how much easier things are. When we get to winter break, I always like to ask my students to compare how they feel now to how they felt in August. And in just that short amount of time, they notice so much difference. So look forward to that point because it will come for you where the research is faster, the analysis is faster, the writing is faster, and it will all start to feel like a much more familiar, comfortable place to be in that process. And that is the list of tips that I made. So I'm happy now to answer the questions that have been coming in.
So first, thank you so much, Professor, for those tips. I think those were so important, particularly two tips that I really was listening to you kind of talk about was the mental health aspect of kind of all of this. First is, it is so important to take care of yourself. As law students, we want to do well, we want to excel, but you cannot do well or excel if you are not healthy, if you're not well, and if you're not, willing and able to get up every day and go to class. So please, y'all, just take care of yourselves. There's kind of, I think, a point where all of us kind of hit a wall our first semester, because it's like, wow, I'm doing this thing that I've never done before. But please just remember to take care of yourselves. And I think the second thing I really listened to what you were saying was when you were talking about how kind of legal writing is the basis of everything. And it really is. After this past summer, kind of after working a little bit in the field, you see how much legal writing, how important it is to everything. To be honest with you, it's kind of most of what we do. We read and we write, and that's it. And so I just kind of wanted to speak on that. So we just got a question, and so I'll start with that. The question is, do you have any advice on picking a topic for a legal paper? So much interests me. I'm having a hard time choosing one thing and narrowing it down. So do you have kind of any advice on choosing a topic or helping narrow down from many different interests?
Yeah. That's great to hear that you're having so many interests to explore. So I'm going to assume we're talking about something like a law review paper, because usually papers for classes, it's more guided. So I don't know. Yes, law review. So for law review, for one, you want to make sure that whatever your interest is there's enough content out there to put together the paper that you want to be able to write. So do maybe some preliminary research into the areas of interest. Also, making sure that your topic is narrow enough, because I think sometimes when students are trying to pick, they pick something that's too broad and then it becomes quickly overwhelming. So make sure you start narrow. If you need to expand that, you can, or if you realize you have started too broad, you can narrow it. But I think that starting from a narrow place gives you a starting point that's manageable, and that won't get too overwhelming. And oftentimes, those narrow topics can lead to the best analysis. And then also, it's wonderful to have a lot of areas of interest for doing this. And so I then think about, of those areas of interest, which ones will you not get tired of, basically, because working on an article is a lot of time, a lot of sometimes tedious work. So try and think of those topics. Which ones do you think for potentially months can you engage with in that way that'll keep your interest? So maybe something that's been more of a long-term interest rather than something recent or something you feel really passionate about.
That was a great response. And I think that's a great kind of way to narrow down the choices that you may have.
Yeah. Can I also add, because you highlighted the mental health, and I recently learned something from a student that I feel is appropriate to share, especially since you also highlighted that. The student shared HALT as the acronym, HALT, and she said that we should halt whenever we feel for the H, hungry, A is angry, the L is lonely, and the T is tired. If you're feeling any of those things, stop, pause, and think about what you need to do to take care of yourself in that way to be able to then come back to your schoolwork. So I thought that was one that I learned.
I'm always confused, so I might need to have some discernment there, but I think that's still a really great acronym to kind of live off of. So we have another question. Do you have any advice for appellate briefs relating to statutory interpretation? I really struggled with my brief and don't feel like I did as well as I could have. So just kind of any advice in that area.
So with that, I'm gonna say since the question's kind of general, I'm gonna have to answer it a little generally. I'd say if you're just generally feeling not happy with it, to trace back through the process of how you worked on it. Go back through, like, did you start with brainstorming? Were you clear on your general ideas before you started trying to put stuff on the page? Did you actually do an outline so that you were organized? And with both the brainstorming and the outlining, something that an attorney mentor once told me is that we have to have clear thinking before we can have clear writing. So that's a really important first step, is to make sure that you are clear just on these ideas, and outlining helps a lot with that. So make sure you're actually doing that stage of the writing process, and then think about when you were drafting, were you taking time to draft, pause, revise, pause, revise? Did you give yourself enough time to engage with your writing in that way? And thinking about then what kinds of revising tips and tricks you used. Did they work for you? Like I said, I encourage my students to do things like reading out loud, using hard copies, using things like highlighting. So are there new ways of revising that you could work on? Are the things you've done working for you? Are they not working for you? And being willing to question, engage with that revising process. So I guess overall my answer is just kind of like, go back to the basics of working through and try and figure out what step might be where you're feeling tripped up. And then also to talk to a professor about it, because professors sometimes can help you to help guide you to the areas that you should first look at strengthening.
I think that's a great kind of way to deal with all of that, especially because I know last year, my first year, I had a paper and I went to my professor and she kind of tore it apart, to be quite honest with you, but it made me such a better writer because I really started to take those things that she said and implement them into my writing. But also something I started doing, which I didn't think outlining was important. I thought I could just start writing and have everything there. But outlining really doesn't leave any room for error, in the sense of, you know, you get this opportunity to kind of write down everything you need to write, everything that needs to go in there and where it needs to go. That way, there's no way you can leave something out because you've already looked at it, you know, from a bird's eye view and seen, okay, this is the map of what I can do. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I know that that has helped me a ton.
Yeah, exactly. And with that outlining also, sometimes professors might basically give you the structure they want. Other times you might have to figure it out more for yourself, and to let, you know, the issue that you have to address guide how that outline is set up so that the structure of your paper then makes sense with what this issue is that you're addressing.
Gotcha. Okay, so
is it okay if I speak the question? Okay. So my question, I just wanted to go, it was kind of in line with the outlining. it is important to outline, and I definitely see when I have the time, as far as like 2 or 3 weeks out in advance to submit some sort of writing to outline, how helpful it is. But I get a little tense when it's a timed writing, and it's encouraged that you outline, and I know that it would be helpful. So if you have any like tips that you could give us on how to maybe outline more quickly and effectively, you know, because I kind of get a little like anxious, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is taking so much time, I'm not going to finish.
Sure. So, so for something time setting, like whether it's like in a legal writing class where you're doing a time memo or an exam that's in a time setting where you have to do a written response, I'd what I used to do, and I think it worked okay, is a super brief outline so that I knew the primary topics that I had to hit so that I wouldn't forget those in the stress of working in that time setting, but not doing the detail that I would have if I had, 2 or 3 weeks to work on assignment. So more bullet points than something more fleshed out. I don't know if you have other input as those types of been in those settings more recently than I have.
Honestly, Lynette, I have a difficult time with that too. I think it's pretty scary because, if you're taking like a midterm, for instance, or a final, and you need to get everything in because this is your grade, I think it's just the type of thing where for me, I'll see my classmates just start writing, but I for sure take maybe 3 or 4 minutes to just get a quick outline, because again, what I notice in my writing is that I like just taking off, but that's not what produces the best results. So I'll take the 3 or 4 minutes, even 5 to 6, I'll make myself a quick outline, and then I'm just able to kind of just go from there. So I would say just to think that the time is, even though it seems like it's a liability, it's really helpful in the end. So that's just what I've noticed. But
yeah, that's a good framing, that it can kind of pay off in that time later, that you're not having to redo something.
For sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So we have a couple more questions that were submitted during registration, so we'll start with some of those. Do you have any tips for explaining something complex and kind of making it more easy to understand? So, kind of taking, I guess, something broad and kind of either narrowing it down or just really diving into something.
Yeah, so when my students are struggling with that, I tell them to think about what they would tell just a friend or family member with no legal knowledge, and if possible, to actually go to that person and tell them. It's like, whether it's a roommate or family member, to just be like, hey, can I talk to you for a few minutes? And like, I'm going to explain this memo issue. I'm going to explain my analysis, and just explain it. And you will kind of just naturally revert into talking to them more how you do in normal ways. And that will help a lot with just getting yourself out of the legalese and just explaining it in simple ways. Some people think of this as like the elevator pitch. If you only had, 2 minutes or whatever to tell somebody about it, what would you boil it down to? I have this book, Plain English for Lawyers, that I have my students go through, because it has a lot of really helpful, just basic writing tips about how to be more direct and concise in your writing. And I think it's a great book to work through. You can kind of do it chapter by chapter. It has descriptions and exercises. So if that's an area that you really wanted to work on with that plain English, I recommend this book. This is the 6th edition. It's been around for a while in the Legal Academy. So yeah, Plain English for Lawyers.
And I would say that's super helpful to me, because my first semester, when I was just trying to figure out how to learn any of the information I needed to learn, I would call my parents or my friends that I knew didn't really know much about the field. Not, people who did know, but people who did not, and see if I could explain or talk back kind of the concept and if they would understand it. And so I think you have a good point, as in, if you talk to someone, then just write down what you kind of said. Obviously, no slang and stuff, but I think that's a better way to do it. I think that's excellent. So you kind of spoke about this, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but the question is, do you have any tips for asking for feedback?
Sure. Yeah. So like I said, do ask those questions, and as much as you can when you're getting feedback, don't just go to the professor and say, tell me what I need to do to get an A. Like, that's too broad, and let's make our goal like more related to your learning process than a letter. And like I said, I think that it says a lot when a student comes to me with their questions, because then I see that they're already engaged in this learning process of recognizing, you know, what am I still struggling with? Here's where I want to seek help. And so I think that that says a lot to the professor when you go seeming prepared to engage with the feedback that they're going to give you.
I think that's great, because that's kind of what I did when I spoke to my professor, which is what I was telling you all about earlier. I kind of went in and I had already read through my paper, and I was like, look, can we talk about, you know, kind of what I did wrong in my analysis, so that, because I knew that that was where my problem area was. And so we kind of just went through that. And I think you're going to get better results every time, because I think professors, as a student, I think professors just want to know that you care enough to just have a direct question. And so I think that was very helpful to her and me.
Yeah, yeah.
So the next question is, do you have any tips on how to deal with writer's block and getting started in the writing process?
Yeah, I was talking to some of my students about this today, because today they had to start drafting their first memo. And what I really told them was just get stuff down on the page. I have in my life also suffered from writer's block because of having this idea of wanting to be able to say it perfectly. It's like, I can't write it until I know exactly what I want to say. And even if we've gone through outline stuff, we sometimes still don't know exactly what we want that first word on the page to be. So I say just start writing, even if it's not at the beginning. Maybe you feel like a paragraph midway through will be more manageable, but just start writing. And so then you have something to work with. It's easier to keep going once you start. Remind yourself you can always go back and fix stuff later. So you don't have to have it perfect or anything on the first try, and just to get those words on the page. Because as I tell my students over and over, once there's something on the page, we have something to work with. And at that point, if you're struggling, you have something to show a professor. And you have something for yourself to revisit. So just at whatever part of the paper you can start at, just get something written down.
And I think that's a great way to get it done, because even if it's, you know, a paper on, you know, a fact pattern, a longer fact pattern, even if you talk about maybe kind of what specific rule you'll be talking about, maybe even if you write down the rule and kind of the elements of the rule or the exceptions, that you can start there. You know that you need to talk about this and kind of expand on that, and you know, find some case law for this. So maybe that's just a way just to get something down on the paper, so you can kind of get started with the bulk of your analysis and your introduction and stuff like that.
It's sometimes helpful too to have your outline and then to just start writing your paragraphs under the portion of the outline, so it doesn't feel like you're starting this brand new thing that might sound overwhelming, but just like, okay, I'm supposed to put, you know, a specific rules paragraph here, and you start writing your rules paragraph under it, and then you just keep adding to this outline, and then eventually you can just get rid of the outline portions and you have your paper left.
So that leads us very nicely into our next question, which we've already talked a lot about. Can you kind of just reiterate some of your outlining tips for us?
Yeah, so first, if you have a professor who gives you an outline, take that as a gift and use it. When I give my students an outline, that's what I want. I'm not giving you an outline to be like, as a trick. It's not like, here's my idea, but I'm challenging you to really go be more creative. It's like, no, I'm giving you an outline because there are, there's obviously like no two pieces of legal writing are the exact same, but there are formulas and foundations that are important to learn, especially in your first year. And so if your professor is giving you an outline, it's because they are trying to help you learn that structure. So use it. As I said, take it as a gift that they've helped you with that part. If you're having to develop it on your own, again, I'd say go back to what you were asked to do. Look at, you know, what is the issue? What are the components of it? And let that be your guide to how the structure forms, because you'll end up with a paper that flows much better if it's informed by what the issue is and what you need to do to analyze that issue than if you just try to force a separate outline upon it.
I think that's great. And then again, something we kind of talked about earlier, the next question is, do you have any advice on dealing with stress around legal writing? So this has to do with the, I guess, the HALT acronym.
Everything about it. So the stress with legal writing, I think something that I always want to most tell my students is just like, don't psych yourself out, because they get these, say like first year memo assignments are a big thing, especially in the beginning. They get this assignment and it seems overwhelming, but we can break it down into pieces. You can break it down into sections, you can break it down into paragraphs. And so then it becomes much more manageable. I also encourage my students, like I said before, don't procrastinate, because hopefully other professors do this as well. But when I'm structuring my syllabus, I'm looking at, okay, this day I'm going to talk about this part of the memo. Then the next week we're going to talk about this part. And I'm intending in that space in between for the students to work on what we just talked about, so that they're actually writing it in pieces, so that at no point do they have to sit down and just write a whole paper. So pay attention to how stuff is structured, and as you learn things, start working on like that portion so that you are doing it piece by piece. Then also, I'll go back to the mental health stuff. Overall, it's hard to write if you are tired and stressed and all of those things. Step away from the computer. If you can, go outside. Breathing, there's all kinds of studies and stuff, but like about like fresh air and trees, and like it really does have this impact on how our brains are functioning. And just get away from your screen when you can. I know that we're all staring at screens even more now, and that creates stress in our bodies and our brains. We are not meant to look at screens all day and to sit in one position. So get up, walk around, look away from the screens, and to do things you enjoy, like make time for family and friends, take time to make the dinner you like, do those things so that you can more holistically approach what you're doing. Something else that I've been doing, because I need this from the teacher side as well, is before bed, having space away from school work. And so I've started reading just fun novels that I like before bed, so that helps me with sleep, because I know for me, it's more the grading, but for you all more the writing. If I'm doing that right up until I try to go to sleep, it's running through my brain all night. I'm not sleeping well, which is not helpful with the stress. So I've been trying to think about things that I can do to help have more restful sleep as part of just this overall taking care of myself, and then being able to approach things with fresh perspective in the morning.
I think that's really important, because what I've made sure to do every night before I go to bed now is watch a couple episodes of Sister. It just drops on Netflix, and
I've been watching it too.
It has been wonderful to relive my childhood, but also it's just nice to kind of give my brain a rest from what I've been doing all day. And I used to be the type of person that wanted to sit down, get the entire paper done, and then, submit it and not look at it ever again. But no, looking at it with fresh eyes, the next day you catch so many little things, you can revise things, you can add or take away. And that has been so helpful to my writing process and my progression as a writer. So I would just say to maybe use that as well.
I'm glad you mentioned Sister. I want to puzzle that, not to talk about Sister in particular, but I've been calling these like my comfort food shows. And I've noticed more and more as we're in this heightened stress that like shows from childhood and stuff are helpful. I use the example of reading a book because I've been enjoying that lately, but like there is no shame in revisiting those like childhood shows that can bring you comfort in a different way. When I was in law school, Full House happened to be on late at night on Nick at Night. So I'd watch Full House before I went to bed, and in a way that felt silly, but it was also like, this is, 6-year-old me watched this show and enjoyed it, and I can kind of have that comfort. So yeah, Sister has been one of my things lately as well.
For sure. So, Lynette, I think that's a great tip. She suggested, try to make sure your study area and where you study, and where you sleep are different places. And I think that's great. I have a desk out here that I'm kind of talking to you all on, and then in my room, I don't bring the laptop. I don't bring any of that, because I think for me, I'm not bringing books in there. I'm not doing that because it has to be separate. We've been at home, you know, these past couple of months, like it's what, 6 or 7 now. So it's been a long time, and things can get kind of blended and the lines can get blurred, but don't let them, because your home still has to be your sanctuary. So the final question that we have for today do you have any tips on writing a concise and precise, organized document?
Well, first with that, I'm glad to hear the words concise and precise, because those are the things that I tell my students over and over. So it sounds like across the country, that's what students are hearing. I'm going to go back to encouraging books like, as I said, Plain English for Lawyers gives a lot of really great tips with helping you work through, like, what's the fluff, what words can you cut out. And I think this is one of the places where it's helpful to work with a hard copy and take that pen of whatever color you wish and just literally cross out words, because I think there's something effective about being able to see the crossed out words on a page, to see the shift in the writing versus just deleting on a screen. And it's something that I think, at least with the concise part, you just have to practice over time, and it will start to be more ingrained of what the extra words are that you can cut out. For being precise, I encourage really rereading, and after every phrase, but after every sentence or so, looking and saying, like, does somebody who doesn't know everything I did from the case I just read, or whatever it is that you're talking about in that sentence, or someone who doesn't know all the arguments going on in my brain, would they be able to read this sentence and understand what I meant? And then looking at the words in it and saying, like, was that precise enough? Like, so I'm trying to think of an example now. If you refer to a park, in that context, was it enough that you said a park, or did you need to mention the specific name of that park? And just really going through and kind of interrogating your own writing about, was I precise enough, and can I cut anything out? And like I said, I think that this is something that, be patient with yourself. It takes time to really develop that skill, and to think of this as something that you'll do like over the course of a term or the year, not something that you're going to master in one paper. And also, if this is some area that you really want to work on, that's a great specific question to bring to a professor and give them, say, a sample paragraph, and have them point out to you like where you could cut things to be more concise, or change the wording to be more concise, and to like circle places where you could be more precise. Because I think that using your own work as an example and having someone else's feedback is super helpful, because you need to learn your own patterns of not being concise and precise enough, rather than just always like the book examples, because we all have our own idiosyncrasies when it comes to our writing.
I think that was a great tip, especially because for me, I know that sometimes I have to make sure I'm not overly describing something that doesn't need it, right? Because, you know, the park may not need it, but
Exactly.
the specific, you know, I don't know, tort that someone committed, that might need a description of something else. So I think that was a great tip. And thank you so much for joining us today. I've just been getting a lot of great tips from you. Like I said, I will be emailing you about this writing assignment personally. Does anyone else have any last minute questions or you know, any other comments for the professor? If you do, I will make sure to read that before we end. Again, I just want to thank you all for joining us today for the legal writing session of the Virtual Office Hours series. We'd like to thank Professor Elyse for sharing tips that will help strengthen and streamline our legal writing skills. I'm currently, that's what I was telling you all. I was currently writing a motion in limine, so it's going to be interesting, but we'll see how that kind of turns out. But for sure, be sure to visit abaforlawstudents.com for upcoming events. We kind of have this website, and there's just a lot of really great a lot of really great kind of things that you can access from that website. It's an invaluable tool for students. So we provide robust content that helps you become a better law student, prepares you to establish and thrive in your career. You know, we're law students, so we kind of, if it's free, it should be for you. You should check it out. You should look at it. But you can kind of, you know, we have things on Quimby for on the website. So really just take the time to check that out. And there are so many ways to get involved with the ABA as a law student. So please be sure to look at that. Again, thank you so much, Professor Elyse. We appreciate it. And if anyone else needs anything, we have something in the chat box. Give me one second. So Professor, if you feel comfortable, do you mind providing your contact information for any of us if we want to contact you about writing questions in the future?
I am happy to do that, plugging it in right now. Yes, thank you for having me. This was fun to get to talk about this. And yeah, I'm happy for you all to get in touch with me. I enjoy writing and I enjoy teaching writing, so I'm happy to have further conversation.
This is great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.